Welcome brothers, I'm JK Mazy, head coach and founder at PornReboot. Today we're going to be talking about the final stage of your porn addiction cycle, and this stage is known as the restoration stage. Prior to this, we had spoken about the other stages such as the dormant stage, the trigger stage, the preparation stage, the acting out stage, and the regret stage. And I also reiterated that the dormant stage is what I consider to be the most dangerous stage, and the regret stage is what I consider to be the most painful stage. And if you'd like to learn more about them, just go back about a couple of days and you'll see that I released videos on those topics. Now brothers, what happens whenever you relapse is that internally and externally, to some extent, your life falls apart. And so the restoration stage, I call it the restoration stage because that's the time when you start picking up the pieces of your life that have fallen apart and you start rebuilding yourself. Now you're actually rebuilding two things. You're rebuilding and taking care of yourself, and you're also rebuilding and taking care of your self-esteem. Let me explain. While you were in your addiction cycle, whether it was preparing or acting out or even during the regret stage, you may not really have been taking care of your environment and your community. And what I mean by that is that maybe you work from home, maybe you had some responsibilities at work, but you're not really focused on them during that time. So your office might be a mess, your files might be all over the place, you may have let go of a lot of responsibilities. So typically during the restoration stage, you're going to find yourself, rearranging your office, even taking care of yourself. Maybe physically you just haven't, you haven't shaved, you haven't been hygienic. And I'm not implying that you've been spending weeks and weeks just binging on porn and not taking care of yourself. It's just that you're less likely to be aware of the things that are important to you when you are going through certain stages of your porn addiction cycle. But suddenly all these things become clear as you go out of the regret stage and you decide like, man, I need to get my life together. Like this porn addiction thing cannot continue. And so you'll rearrange your office. Sometimes men will start taking care of their finances, so maybe you put in a few more hours at work. If you've been missing time at work, you'll put in a few more hours in your education if you're in school or you're learning something. When it comes to relationships, if you're married or in a relationship, you'll start spending more time with your partner because you've been emotionally distant. And often your partner might find herself being quite surprised because she's like, hey, you've been very distant and irritable this entire time. You've not wanted to have sex. You've not wanted to show any intimacy or affection. Why are you suddenly doing it now? And that's because you're going through the restoration stage. This is your way of kind of making up for all the things that you haven't been giving in your relationship. Sometimes you'll spend money or surprise your partner. One of the things that you may be able to relate to most in the restoration stage, especially when you're taking care of yourself and rebuilding yourself, are habits like reinstalling your porn blocker, deleting certain apps that you've been using to act out sexually, deleting your profile from dating apps, deleting, the contacts of women you've been chatting with, or pictures or different things that you've saved. And, this is important to note, brother, because you may have been assuming that this is you trying to get back on the horse. This is you, relapsing again and then trying to end your behavior. There's a real difference between being in recovery and trying to reboot and being in the restoration stage. I'll say it again. There's a difference between actually being in recovery and trying to reboot, trying to rewire your brain, and being in the restoration stage. In the restoration stage, you're coming right out of the regret stage. You may be high remorse, you may be low remorse. If you don't know what that is, and this is your first time watching this video, go to the last video and watch that to learn about high remorse and low remorse. But you're coming right out of the regret stage, and all you're doing is trying to rebuild your life. Rebuilding your life is not the same thing as rebooting. There's a separate process involved when it comes to rebooting. So all you're doing right now is just trying to take care of yourself again to live a normal life. However, you may tell yourself that I'm doing this because I'm trying to end my addiction. Not really. Most of the time, you're just in the restoration stage. And that's one of the things I really try to help men identify. Because if you buy into the belief that the restoration stage is actually the beginning of recovery for you, you now fall straight into the dormant stage again. You're not going through recovery, you fall into the dormant stage, and again, you end up fooling yourself into believing that everything is good, right? Because one of the things we do to take care of ourselves is reinstall porn blockers, maybe start talking to accountability partners again. And all these things suddenly make you feel safe. They make you feel that you're not going to go through that regret stage again for a very short period of time. That's how we end up falling into the dormant stage. So just be aware of that, brother. The second part of the restoration stage is when we take care of our self-esteem. Now, this is where we start using those cognitive distortions, those lies, those thinking errors that I spoke about in order to kind of stave off sadness, regret, depression, or anxiety, which are some of the very strong emotions that we experience during the regret stage after we've relapsed. Many of us also don't want to feel shame. The truth is that many men who struggle with an out-of-control behavior, with porn, sex, or masturbation, have responsibilities, right? So you have a career, you're being educated, you're going to school, you have a business, and the truth is you cannot be non-functional during this period. You cannot allow your fear, your anxiety, your shame, any depression that comes after this to throw you off track. So you start using justification, normalization, minimization, rationalization, feelings of invincibility, whatever you've got to tell yourself. And I found in my practice over the past 9 years of helping men end their out-of-control behavior with porn and masturbation, that the more successful you are, the higher achieving you are, the more forms of cognitive distortions you're going to use to get through this stage. In fact, some guys have just so many layers of this that you truly believe that this isn't that big a deal. In fact, some of you are really good at even forgetting how many times you've relapsed because your cognitive distortions are so effective. See, you're successful, and one of the reasons that you're successful, just in life for those of you who are, is because you know how to brush off failures. So you can deal with a lot of rejection, you can deal with a lot of failures, and you can keep moving. But when it comes to your addiction, you apply that same concept to it, but in your addiction it ends up being a cognitive distortion because your addiction is actually a destructive behavior. And so you just brush off a slip as another failure, even though below the surface, your shame, your anxiety, and your depression keeps mounting. And this is why many men get to a certain level in their life, those who are successful, and they just crack and everything falls apart because you're not dealing with those underlying issues. You're simply adding more layers to it as you lie to yourself, albeit very skillfully, and feel that you're still functioning and you're going to be fine. In the process of taking care of themselves during the restoration stage, some men also fall back on other compulsive behaviors. So you may be one of those guys who falls back on work. You start grinding really hard. Go back to a project you're working on. Go back to your startup. Pick up extra hours at work. Start a new business. Other men do it with exercise. Like, all right, I'm going to get back on my diet plan. I'm going to start prepping for this physique competition. I'm going to get a six-pack. I'm going to get on this new workout plan. I'm going to start running this number of miles again. And you get really compulsive about it. And you feel that that's a healthy thing, but I don't consider it a healthy thing because you're using that as a means of building yourself back up from a behavior that is compulsive, which means that this behavior, after it goes through this dormant stage, is still going to come back. It is better to spend some time instead working through the unresolved issues, working through the strong emotions, developing coping strategies for all the different things which are causing you to be triggered, than it is to just jump headlong 80 hours, 60 hours, 70 hours a week into some new form of compulsion. Some of you may pick up drugs or alcohol hanging out with friends, and doing all these things, a new lifestyle as a combination. So I see a lot of guys who are into self-development, and you end up using self-development as something in your restoration stage to take care of yourself. So you start reading a new book and you're like, you know what, Atomic Habits. You know, I'm gonna start developing all these new habits. I'm gonna start eating well. I'm gonna start working out. I'm gonna start dating. You're not doing anything that has to do with dealing with your addiction or dealing with your addiction cycle. The funny thing is, you're just going through the same cycle despite everything that you're doing. There are also some men who end up going to therapy. And you feel that going to therapy is a way of dealing with this. For many men who go to therapy during the restoration stage do not tell their therapist about their behavior. You may tell your therapist some things, you may allude to some things, but you know that you're leaving a lot of stuff out. I know what I'm talking about because I speak to a lot of men that end up working with us when therapy doesn't work out for them. And it's not that therapy is not working out for them. It's just that you're not comfortable sharing everything with your therapist. And the truth is that deep inside, you are what I call a trial rebooter, not a true rebooter. Deep inside, you're not ready to completely let this go. And you have a feeling that if you were to share everything and you were to face that shame, there's a possibility that you might actually end this behavior. But are you truly ready to let go of the little pleasure that you get from pornography, masturbation, and sexual acting out? That's the question to ask yourself, right? Are you ready to let go of it as a coping strategy and develop other coping strategies? It isn't easy. I understand where you're coming from. But for those of you who are going to therapy, please don't fool yourself into thinking that you're not in the restoration stage, especially if you're not being upfront about all aspects of your behavior. At the end of the day, brothers, the restoration stage is the final stage, because unless you're one of those guys who experiences a lot of shame in the regret stage and then goes straight back to the triggered stage, which I spoke about on the video where I spoke about the regret stage of your porn addiction cycle, unless you're in that situation, you're going to go right back to the dormant stage. And that's it, brother. The porn addiction cycle. So I hope you found it helpful. I'd love to know what you think about it, and if you have any questions about it, go ahead and share it in the comment section below. And if you'd like to learn more about porn addiction and what you can do to get this behavior under control or to rewire your brain permanently, go ahead and click on the subscribe button on the right hand side of this screen so that you can receive notifications anytime I release a video. And if you'd like to learn more about our system, one of the easiest ways to do so is to pick up a free copy of my ebook. It's called Confessions of a Porn Addict, 7 Secrets of Porn-Free Men. And there's a link to download a copy in the description below this video. We also have a free support group on Facebook where you can get yourself an accountability partner, where you can learn how to understand the system better, and where you can communicate with me directly. There's a link to that in the description below the video as well. Brothers, if you feel that this video could help other men, please don't be shy about sharing it. This is the way that the channel grows. This is how we support and help more men. And even though I have a system, 95% of my system is absolutely free. You can find it here on YouTube. You can find it in my emails. You can find it on our Facebook group as well. I'm JK, your brother in this struggle. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll speak to you in a couple of days. Take care.